South Yorkshire police have confirmed that they're searching a property in Berkshire.
But the first he knew of the investigation was when a friend called, having seen the footage on the BBC. Sir Cliff described collapsing in it.
Cliff Richard is one of those names you can't really escape in British music. The guy has sold something like 250 million records, and on top of that, he was knighted by the Queen, which basically put an official stamp on what everyone already thought. That he was this rock-solid, dependable figure in the often unpredictable world of pop. For more than 60 years, he carried that image pretty effortlessly. But even now, at 84, he still gets shaken when he thinks about one particular day. That was when news helicopters showed up over his house, and the polished reputation he had worked so hard to build over decades suddenly cracked. Now, the stories he managed to keep tucked away since the 1980s have started creeping out, and you won't believe what he has been hiding. Most people think of Cliff Richard. There's probably one picture that instantly comes to mind. It's the Cliff of Summer Holiday. Big smile with those perfect teeth, that never-failing quiff of hair, and maybe even a cozy cardigan that looks like something your gran might have knitted. That version of Cliff wasn't just coincidence. It was the result of some very careful planning. Right from the moment his song Move It burst into the charts back in 1958, his team made sure he was presented as a sort of safe, polished version of rock and roll, like Elvis, but the kind you could bring home to meet your mom without anyone worrying. The BBC was more than happy to get behind that image, even giving him his own TV show and presenting him as this wholesome, family-friendly figure. The tabloids loved it too, branding him the Peter Pan of pop. And for decades, everyone, the media, the fans, and even Cliff himself, leaned into that story. But away from the cameras, things looked a little different. Cliff was very deliberate about drawing a line between his public self and his private life, and he stuck to it with almost military precision. While bands like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones were making headlines for their wild antics and controversies, Cliff was chasing something you wouldn't normally expect from someone that famous: the chance to just live quietly. He stayed in the same small flat in Weybridge for about 40 years, which is kind of wild when you think about how most stars were splashing out on huge mansions. He was the sort of guy you'd see at the same church every Sunday, keeping his life steady with faith and routine. And although he made millions from his career, a lot of that money quietly went to charity, without any big announcements or photo ops. In the end, the version of Cliff Richard the public got was polished and carefully maintained, but the one part he never shared, and never wanted to, was the real Cliff.
Told him they were coming. He was never arrested and ultimately never charged.
South Yorkshire police have confirmed that they're searching a property in Berkshire.
But the first he knew of the investigation was when a friend called, having seen the footage.
You see, on August 14th, 2014, Cliff Richard was just minding his own business when things suddenly flipped upside down. Out of nowhere, his own life became the breaking news story. Sky News cut to live footage showing helicopters circling and police cars pulling up outside his home in Berkshire. The story being broadcast was that there was a complaint to the Metropolitan Police's Operation U-Tree, which investigated SA allegations in the wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal. But pretty quickly, the details didn't really add up. At first, they said the incident happened in 1985. Then suddenly, it was 1984. And later, stadium records showed that the part of the arena where it was claimed to have happened wasn't even built until 1989, years after the fact. Still, once a story like that goes public, the damage is kind of instant. On social media, #CliffRichard blew up worldwide, and people were throwing around opinions before the facts even had a chance to settle. The fallout was rough, and for the first time in his entire 55-year career, one of his tours got canceled, and the whole machine that had kept going for decades just came to a standstill. He also pulled out of a planned trip to the US Open, turned down an honorary award from his adopted home city of Albufeira in Portugal, and even canceled an appearance at Canterbury Cathedral, saying he didn't want those moments to be overshadowed by what he called a false allegation. Eventually, he came back to the UK and met with South Yorkshire Police voluntarily. They interviewed him, but he was never arrested, and in the end, no criminal charges were ever brought against him. The very next day, Cliff released a short statement saying he'd known about these allegations for months, that they were totally false, and that he had never assaulted anyone. After that, he basically disappeared from public view, hopping on a plane back to Portugal and retreating into private life. Before we continue, let's do a quick flashback all the way to 1958. Back then, he wasn't Cliff at all. He was Harry Webb, this kid born in Lucknow, which was then part of British India, trying to make it in post-war Britain. One night, he steps onto a London stage wearing this shiny gold lame jacket, which must have looked like pure Hollywood compared to the drabness of everyday life at the time. Then he launches into Move It, and the place just goes crazy. People hadn't really had their own proper rock and roll anthem yet, and suddenly, here it was, being belted out by one of their own. That moment basically changed everything. By the time he hit 21, Harry Webb was history, and Cliff Richard had become Britain's top-selling singles artist. But then, right as his career was skyrocketing, he made a choice that surprised pretty much everyone in the business. At 25, he became a born-again Christian. And he didn't keep it private either. He was baptized in a swimming pool in the Bahamas, which made headlines everywhere. His record label panicked a bit, wondering what would happen to his carefully crafted image. Rock and roll was supposed to be rebellious and sexy, but here was Cliff saying no more Sunday gigs because that day was for church. He even refused to be filmed drinking, not even as part of a role in one of his movies. He cut ties with a lot of old industry friends who lived the stereotypical rock and roll lifestyle, which only made the contrast sharper. The press, of course, couldn't resist poking fun, and they came up with the phrase Cliff's celibate charm offensive to describe his new, squeaky clean approach. The truth about Cliff's personal life was never as black and white as people like to think. He did date. He just didn't make a big song and dance about it. Over the years, his name got linked to quite a few women: Jackie Irving, who was a dancer, Sue Barker, the famous tennis player, and probably most famously, Olivia Newton-John. Cliff and Olivia first met in 1972, and apparently the chemistry was pretty clear to everyone around them. The problem was, their careers were like two fast trains passing each other on different tracks, always moving, never stopping at the same time. Olivia later admitted that the timing was always wrong, which says a lot about how close they really were. Cliff, though, stayed quiet about it, like he always did. For him, keeping his private life private wasn't just a choice anymore, it was who he was. Over the decades, he built that privacy up like a fortress, brick by brick, and then, in 2014, that fortress was smashed apart.
At one point, I actually thought I was going to have a heart attack or stroke. I'd wake up in the middle of the night going over things in my head again and again.
The police raid in 2014 wasn't just about headlines or damage to his image. It cracked open the sealed box of Cliff's personal life in a way that nobody had ever seen before. For the first time, people were really trying to peel back the layers and figure out who Cliff Richard actually was. His finances, for example, turned out to be the opposite of the chaotic spending sprees you'd expect from a big rock star. He was super careful and forward-thinking with money, even back in the day. He invested early in eco-friendly housing developments in Portugal's Algarve, and a lot of his royalties went into charitable projects, things like nursing homes and Bible translation work. Most of it was done quietly, through shell companies and low-key channels, all totally legal and neatly organized. If anything, it showed that Cliff's mind worked with the same precision as his career, tidy, structured, and always under control. When it comes to Cliff's relationship status, that's been the favorite topic of the tabloids for what feels like forever. In every interview, people tried to press him about it, and he usually brushed it off with the same line: "I'm married to the audience." It was his go-to joke, but underneath it, he never gave much away. For decades, he avoided talking about partners or even addressing his orientation, which only fueled more speculation. The public filled in the blanks however they wanted. Some decided he must be gay. Others said he was probably asexual. But friends who actually know him paint a much simpler picture. Cliff just values his own space, and maybe that mattered more to him than fitting into anyone's expectations.
What about the business too of yourself and a family? You're 63 now. You've never got married or engaged or anything like that. I mean,
Political and pushing hard on anti-gay campaigns, they wanted Cliff on their side. He flat out refused. One bishop even tried to pressure him, and Cliff's response was sharp but telling: "I follow Jesus, not a political brand." That's how he was. The so-called controversies in his life weren't about scandals or messy drama, but about him quietly standing his ground and living by his own principles, even if that meant stepping away from the spotlight.
You're the king of this,
Well,
aren't you?
you know, the secret was to have a load of onions. If I'm going to cook a gravy, make a gravy
Yeah.
for like 8 people, I would use 3 onions that big, chopped
right.
up pretty fine. And while it takes such a long time in olive oil to actually
Slowly.
slowly.
After the raid, Cliff basically retreated to Portugal, but he wasn't about to just sit there and take it. From his self-imposed exile, he started to fight back. He pulled together a really strong legal team, and his goal wasn't only to prove his innocence. He wanted to go after the system that had allowed the whole circus to unfold in the first place. For him, it became about privacy and fairness. In 2016, things kicked off properly when he filed a lawsuit against both the BBC and the South Yorkshire Police. He argued that they had worked together in a way that completely trampled his right to privacy. It turned into a landmark case, basically one man taking on 2 of the most powerful institutions in Britain. When the High Court finally gave its ruling, it came down firmly on Cliff's side. The judge called the BBC's coverage sensationalist and said it was a serious invasion of his privacy, awarding him £210,000 in damages. The BBC tried to appeal, but they lost again, which locked the case in as a legal precedent. These days, law students get taught Richard vs. BBC in their first year as a classic example of where the line sits between the public's right to know and someone's right to privacy. In true Cliff fashion, he didn't keep the money. Every penny went straight to charity. But even with the win, he couldn't help feeling like the whole thing had dragged on far too long. "Justice delayed is justice denied," he said, summing up how many years of his life the ordeal had eaten away. When the Crown Prosecution Service eventually closed the case, they used the phrase insufficient evidence as their official reasoning. For Cliff, that wording was like a thorn in his side. He hit back with one of his most stinging lines: "Insufficient? Try non-existent." That distinction mattered to him, because while insufficient made it sound like there was something there but not enough proof, non-existent was the reality. The allegation had no basis at all. Still, the headlines around the world ran with the official phrase, and to anyone just glancing at the news, it left a shadow of doubt. The truth was that he'd been cleared, The allegation was false, but the market left on his reputation never fully faded. Since the trial, Cliff Richard has been living a very different kind of life. He's not the ever-present figure he once was in British pop culture. In 2018, he put out Rise Up, his first album of original secular songs in 14 years. But even that release felt different. There weren't the usual morning TV interviews or big media rollouts. He kept it low-key. These days, his main home is in Barbados, far from the intensity of the British press. His routine there is simple and steady. He's up at 5 in the morning for a swim in the Caribbean Sea, then maybe spends a few hours recording vocals in his home studio, and the afternoons are often given over to reading theology until the sun goes down. Even when he goes to church now, he doesn't take a front row seat like he used to. Instead, he slips into a pew at the back, there more for peace than for visibility. He'll still stop and sign an autograph if someone asks, but friends say you can spot a subtle flinch if anyone brings up the year 2014. When a documentary team invited him to revisit the raid in 2020, he politely turned it down with a line that said it all. "Some memories haunt. I prefer to sing." A lot of the physical reminders of his old life have gone too. The gold discs that once decorated his home aren't there anymore. He gave them away to longtime crew and staff. He now uses encrypted apps for texting, which says a lot about how his trust has been chipped away. And the man who once posed for photographers with ease now has a simple rule in the studio: no phones, no cameras. That easy, open relationship he once had with the world has shifted permanently. Even with everything he's been through, there's a real resilience at the heart of Cliff Richard. At 83, he headlined a string of concerts at London's Royal Albert Hall, not just returning to the stage, but raising a remarkable £1.7 million for children's hospices in the process. Then, at 84, he was back at Abbey Road Studios, the very place where his career started, recording new Christmas duets. Critics listening to his recent work have noted a shift in his voice. Richer, sadder, still unmistakably Cliff, one wrote. He's reaching a new generation of fans, climbing back onto streaming charts, and there's even talk that Netflix might be interested in a biopic about his life. But there's a catch. Sir Cliff wants final approval over the script. It's easy to see why. Word is that he's particular about how his story ends. He wants the final scene to show him walking along a Portuguese beach at sunset, a place that's become his refuge. There, he'd recite his favorite line of scripture, a verse that's taken on even deeper meaning over the years. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." Of course, it reflects his enduring faith in God, but it also speaks to something bigger. His belief that no matter how long it takes, the truth will always have the final word. At 84, he is not a bitter man, but he is, by his own admission, a tired one. He is tired of the need for secrets, tired of the relentless headlines, and tired of having to offer explanations that should never have been necessary in the first place. And yet, something magical happens every time he steps up to the microphone. That old familiar joy sparks back to life. The same irrepressible spark that first ignited in a London club in 1958, carrying a boy from Lucknow, India, on an unbelievable journey around the world. And maybe that, in the end, is the final secret. After everything he has endured, the song still wins. So, what do you make of Cliff Richard's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're